Mr. Thrale had now another contest for the representation in Parliament of the Borough of Southwark, and Johnson kindly lent him his assistance by writing advertisements and letters for him. I shall insert one as a specimen. To the worthy electors of the Borough of Southwark. Gentlemen, a new Parliament being now called, I again solicit the honor of being elected for one of your representatives, and solicit it with the greater confidence, as I am not conscious of having neglected my duty or of having acted otherwise than as becomes the independent representative of independent constituents. A superior to fear, hope, and expectation. Superior to fear, hope, and expectation, who has no private purpose to promote and whose prosperity is involved in the prosperity of his country. As my recovery from a very severe distemper is not yet perfect, I have declined to attend the hall, and hope an omission so necessary will not be harshly censured. I can only send my respectful wishes that all your deliberations may tend to the happiness of the kingdom and the peace of the borough. I am, gentlemen, your most faithful and obedient servant, Southwark, September 5th, 1780, Henry Thrale. It's interesting how much ghostwriting, hack jobs even, Johnson would do. On his birthday, Johnson had this note. I am now beginning the 72nd year of my life, with more strength of body and greater vigor of mind than I think is common at that age. But still he complains of sleepless nights and idle days, and forgetfulness or neglect of resolutions. I'm right there with you, and I'm much younger than you are, Johnson. He thus pathetically expresses himself. Surely I shall not spend my whole life with my own total disapprobation. That's sad. Mr. McBean, whom I have mentioned more than once as one of Johnson's humble friends, a deserving but unfortunate man, being now oppressed by age and poverty, Johnson solicited the Lord Chancellor Thurlow to have him admitted into the Charterhouse. I take the liberty to insert his lordship's answer, as I am eager to embrace every occasion of augmenting the respectful notion which should ever be entertained of my illustrious friend. London, October 24th, 1780. To Dr. Samuel Johnson. Sir, I at this moment received your letter dating the 19th and returned from Bath. In the beginning of the summer, I placed one in the Chartreux without the sanction of a recommendation so distinct and so authoritative as yours of McBean. And I am afraid that now, according to the establishment of the house, the opportunity of making the charity so good amends will not soon recur. But whenever a vacancy shall happen, if you'd favor me with notice of it, I will try to recommend him to that place, even though it should not be my turn to nominate. I am, sir, with great regard, your most faithful and obedient servant, Thurlow. Okay, and now here's a letter to Boswell. To James Boswell, Esquire. Dear sir, I am sorry to write you a letter that will not please you, and yet it is at last what I resolved to do. This year must pass without an interview. The summer has been foolishly lost, like many others of my summers and winters. I hardly saw a grain field, but stayed in town to work, without working much. Mr. Thrale's loss of health has lost him the election. He is now going to Brighthelmston and expects me to go with him. And how long I shall stay, I cannot tell. I do not much like the place, but yet I shall go, and stay while my stay is desired. We must, therefore, content ourselves with knowing what we know as well as men can know the mind of man, that we love one another, and that we wish each other's happiness, and that the lapse of a year cannot lessen our mutual kindness. I was pleased to be told that I accused Mrs. Boswell unjustly in supposing that she bears me ill will. I love you so much that I would be glad to love all that love you and that you love. And I have love very ready for Mrs. Boswell if she thinks it worthy of acceptance. I hope all the young ladies and gentlemen are well. I take a great liking to your brother. He tells me that his father received him kindly, but not fondly. However, you seem to have lived well enough at Arnek while you stayed. Make your father as happy as you can. You lately told me of your health. I can tell you in return that my health has been for more than a year past better than it has been for many years before. Perhaps it may please God to give us some time together before we are parted. I am, dear sir, yours most affectionately, October 1780, Sam Johnson. Being disappointed in my hopes of meeting Johnson this year, so that I could hear none of his admirable sayings, I shall compensate for this want by inserting a collection of them, for which I am indebted to my worthy friend Mr. Langton, whose kind communications have been separately interwoven in many parts of this work. Very few articles of this collection were committed to writing by himself, he not having that habit, which he regrets, and which those who know the numerous opportunities he had of gathering the rich fruits of Johnsonian wit and wisdom must ever regret. I, however, found in conversations with him that a good store of Johnsoniana was treasured in his mind, and I compared it to Herculaneum, or some old Roman field, Herculaneum, or some old Roman field, which, when dug, fully rewards the labor employed. The authenticity of every article is unquestionable, for the expression I, who wrote them down in his presence, am partly answerable. And here we go. This is quoted now. Theocritus is not deserving of very high respect as a writer. As to the pastoral part, Virgil is very evidently superior. He wrote when there had been a larger influx of knowledge into the world than when Theocritus lived. Theocritus does not abound in the description, though living in a beautiful country. The manners painted are coarse and gross. Virgil has much more description, more sentiment, more of nature, and more of art. Some of the most excellent parts of Theocritus are when Castor and Pollux, going with the other Argonauts, land on the Bebrycian coast and there fall into dispute with Amycus, the king of that country, which is all well conducted as Eupedes could have done it, and the battle is well related. Afterwards they carry off a woman whose two brothers come to recover her, and expostulate with Castor and Pollux on their injustice. But they pay no regard to the brothers, and the battle ensues, where Castor and his brother are triumphant. Theocritus seems not to have seen that the brothers have the advantage in their argument over his Argonaut heroes. The Sicilian Gossips is a piece of merit. Callimachus is a writer of little excellence. The chief thing to be learned from him is his account of rites and mythology, which, though desirable to be known for the sake of understanding other parts of ancient authors, is the least pleasing or valuable part of their writings. Mateer's account of the Stephanie is a heavy book. He seems to have been a puzzle-headed man with a large share of scholarship, but with little geometry or logic in his head, without method and possessed of little genius. He wrote Latin verses from time to time and published a set in his old age, which he called Senilia, in which he shows so little learning or taste in writing as to make Carteret a dactyl. In matters of genealogy, it is necessary to give the bare names as they are, but in poetry and in prose of any elegance in the writing, they require to have inflection given to them. This book of the dialects is a sad heap of confusion. The only way to write on them is to tabulate them with notes added at the bottom of the page and references. It may be questioned whether there is not some mistake as to the methods of employing the poor, seemingly on a supposition that there is a certain portion of work left undone for want of persons to do it. But if that is otherwise, then all of the materials we have are actually worked up, or all the manufacturers we can use or dispose of are already executed, and what is given to the poor who are to be set at work must be taken from some who now have it, at times must be taken for learning, according to Sir William Petty's observations. As time must be taken for learning, according to Sir William Petty's observation. A certain part of those very materials that, as it is, are properly worked up, must be spoiled by the unskillfulness of novices. We may apply to well-meaning but misjudging persons, in particular of this nature, what Gion said to a monk who wanted what he called to convert him, "Tu sei santo matu non si philosopho." You are a saint, but you are not a philosopher. It is an unhappy circumstance that one might give away £500 in a year to those that importune in the streets and not do any good. There is nothing more likely to betray a man into absurdity than condescension, when he seems to suppose his understanding too powerful for his company. Having asked Mr. Langton if his father and mother had set for their pictures, which he thought it right for each generation of a family to do, and being told they had opposed it, he said, "Sir, among the anfractuosities of the human mind, I know not if it may not be one, that there is a superstitious reluctance to sit for a picture." The word here is ANFRACTUOSITIES. Might be pronouncing that wrong. Never seen it before. Seems to mean among the picadillos or something along those lines. John Gilbert Cooper related that soon after the publication of his dictionary, Garrick, being asked by Johnson what people said of it, told him that among other animadversions, it was objected that he cited authorities which were beneath the dignity of such a work, and mentioned Richardson. "Nay," said Johnson, "I have done worse than that. I have cited thee, David." Oh, funny. Talking of expense, Johnson observed with what munificence a great merchant will spend his money, both from his having it at command and from his enlarged views by calculation of a good effect upon the whole. "Whereas," said he, "you will hardly ever find a country gentleman who is not a good deal disconcerted at an unexpected occasion for his being obliged to lay out £10. When in good humor, he would talk of his own writings with a wonderful frankness and candor, and would even criticize them with the closest severity. One day, having read over one of his ramblers, Mr. Langton asked him how he liked that paper. Johnson shook his head and answered, "Too wordy." At another time, when one was reading his tragedy of Irene to a company at a house in the country, Johnson left the room, and somebody having asked him the reason for this, he replied, "Sir, I thought it had been better." Yeah, I don't think that Irene was so good. Sorry, Johnson. Talking of a point of delicate scrupulosity of moral conduct, he said to Mr. Langton, "Men of harder minds than ours will do many things from which you and I would shrink. Yet, sir, they will perhaps do more good in life than we. But let us try to help one another. If there be a wrong twist, it may be set right. It is not probable that two people can be wrong the same way." Of the preface to Capel's Shakespeare, Johnson said, "If the man would have come to me, I would have endeavored to endow his purpose with words. For as it is, he doth gabble monstrosely." That's quoting Tempest. He related that he had once in a dream a contest of wit with some other person, and that he was very much mortified by imagining that his opponent had the better of him. Now, said Johnson, one may mark here the effect of sleep in weakening the power of reflection, for had not my judgment failed me, I should have seen that the wit of this supposed antagonist, by whose superiority I felt myself depressed, was as much furnished by me as that which I thought I had been uttering in my own character. It's true. One evening in company, an ingenious and learned gentleman read to him a letter of compliment which he had received from one of the professors of a foreign university. Johnson, in an irritable fit, thinking there was too much ostentation, said, I never received any of these tributes of applause from abroad. One instance I recollect of a foreign publication in which mention is made of Leastre Luckman, who was secretary of the British herring fishery, remarkable for an extraordinary number of occasional verses, not of eminent merit. Of Sir Joshua Reynolds, Johnson said, Sir, I know no man who has passed through life with more observation than Reynolds. He repeated to Mr. Langton with great energy, in the Greek, our Saviour's gracious expressions concerning the forgiveness of Mary Magdalene. And here be some Greek, which I will not read, but there's a translation that says, Thy faith hath saved thee, go in peace, from Luke. Chapter 3, chapter 7, line 50, I think. He said, the manner of this dismission is exceedingly affecting. He thus defined the difference between physical and moral truth. Physical truth is when you tell a thing as it actually is. Moral truth is when you tell a thing sincerely and precisely as it appears to you. I say such a one walked across the street. If he really did so, I told a physical truth. If I thought so, though I should have been mistaken, I told a moral truth. I guess he's meaning I thought I was telling the truth. I think that's what he's going for there. Huggins, the translator of Ariosto, and Mr. Thomas Warton, in the early part of his literary life, had a dispute concerning that poet, of whom Mr. Warton, in his observations on Spenser's Faery Queen, gave some account, which Huggins attempted to answer with violence, and said, I will militate no longer against his nescience. Huggins was master on the subject, but wanted expression. Mr. Warton's knowledge of it was then imperfect, but his manner lively and elegant. Johnson said, it appears to me that Huggins has ball without powder, and Warton powder without ball. Talking of the farce of High Life Below Stairs by Reverend James Townley, Johnson said, here is a farce which is really very diverting when you see it acted. And yet, once one may read it and not know that one had been reading anything at all. He used at one time to go occasionally to the green room of Drury Lane Theatre, where he was much regarded by the players and was very easy and facetious with them. He had a very high opinion of Mrs. Clive's comic powers, and conversed more with her than with any of them. He said, Clive, sir, is a good thing to sit by. She always understands what you say. And she said of him, I love to sit by Dr. Johnson. He always entertains me. One night, when the recruiting officer was acted, he said to Mr. Holland, who had been expressing an apprehension that Dr. Johnson would disdain the works of Farquhar, no, sir, I think Farquhar a man whose writings have considerable merit. His friend Garrick was so busy in conducting the drama that they could not have so much intercourse as Mr. Garrick used to profess an anxious wish that there should be. Footnote here says, in a letter written by Johnson to a friend in 1742 and 43, he says, I never see Garrick. So I guess this incident is happening in the past. News to me, because Garrick's dead, right? There might indeed be something in the contemptuous severity as to the merit of acting, which his old preceptor nourished in himself, that would mortify Garrick after the great applause which he received from the audience. For though Johnson said of him, "Sir, a man who has a nation to admire him every night may well be expected to be somewhat elated," yet he would treat theatrical matters with a ludicrous slight. He mentioned one evening, "I met David coming off the stage, dressed in a woman's riding hood, when he acted in The Wonder. I came full upon him, and I believe he was not pleased." Once he asked Tom Davies, whom he saw dressed in a fine suit of clothes, "And what art thou tonight?" Tom answered, "The Thane of Ross," which it will be recollected is a very inconsiderable character. "Oh, brave," said Johnson. I think this last last paragraph is also about the theater, so I'll read this. Of Mr. Longley at Rochester, or Roster, I don't know, a gentleman of very considerable learning, whom Dr. Johnson met there, he said, this isn't about theater, but I'll read it anyway. "My heart warms towards him. I was surprised to find in him such a nice acquaintance with the mater in the learned languages, though I was somewhat mortified that I had not so much to myself as I should have thought." Okay. Well, that's it for now. Until next time, bye from Boswell.